A word to the wise. We are an explicit podcast tackling content with adult themes as well as entering spoiler territory if you aren't caught up with us. This week, that would be through chapter 28 of Mistborn, The Final Empire by Branderson. Hey there, this is Cross.
I am PJ.
And we are Words and Whiskey, a podcast for veteran and novice readers alike. We tackle fiction novels and love to talk about what we're drinking. You should think of us as your intoxicating weekly book club.
I made a cocktail, Crossland. Like, for the first time in a while, I just went off script and made a cocktail. Kind of exists in general terms, but I think it's unique enough that I am calling it my own. So I'm excited to share it with the world.
It is an exciting one, too. And you've got fancy new glasses.
I do have fancy new glasses.
And drink and everything will be showing up on the website because it's such a cool and good tasting cocktail. So it's going to be a lot of fun. We got a lot of shit to talk about.
Very cool and good.
Very cool and good, because that's the metric. Yep. Those are the metrics. Okay. So with that, today is our 7th episode discussing Mistborn, The Final Empire by Branderson, and we are going to be chatting about chapters 25 through 28. But before we get into those chapters, those lovely chapters switching from part 3 into part 4, let's talk about what we're drinking. PJ, tell me about this lovely cocktail that you've invented and crafted today.
So I have decided to name it the Ladrian Soother after our good buddy Breeze. But it is 2 ounces of vodka. I used Rakia, which is, as we've discussed several times, our favorite brand of vodka. 1 ounce of ginger liqueur, 1 ounce of lemon juice, half an ounce of rosemary simple syrup. I shook all that and then served it in my new coupe glass and garnished it with a lemon peel and rosemary sprig. So I think what I would do differently, I think I'd go a little bit heavier on the ginger liqueur. That kind of gets lost from all of the rosemary that comes through, and the lemon. Like, it's just a little bit too light, and maybe I'd look for a stronger ginger liqueur in general. Maybe that's the solution. I'm not sure. But I didn't want to go too heavy because I didn't want it to be too sweet. But I think additionally, I'd add a little bit of bitters. This was my first pass at it. I really like how it turned out. It's complex. It's a little bit sweet. It's light and just kind of layered. So I like the reveal as you drink it. But yeah, that's that. Following that up.
That sounds really tasty, and I think it's appropriately named.
There were other ideas bouncing around, but ultimately this one made the most sense. Next up after that is a beer by Blackstack Brewing that I think I've had on the show before, but a different varietal of it. It is the now presenting, it used to be Ken Burns Presents. This one, however, is new. It has plum, grapefruit, and passion fruit as the fruit additives. So, excited to give that one a try. Crossland, what have you got for us?
I am having what I've affectionately retitled the Fuck Me Sideways because it is so damn good. Previously on the podcast, I think 2 or 3 episodes ago, I had a drink called the Strawberry Sovereign that I basically spruced up a style of sour for the kind of New Year's celebration that they were doing over at Hail Reaper. Very good drink. I picked out this new bourbon that I gave a try right before the show called Legent Bourbon. It is my favorite bourbon for the price, for sure. Like, no doubt, $40 bottle here. Incredible, crazy tasting. So I renamed the drink because it uses specifically the Legent bourbon, and it is fucking amazing. So 2 ounces of Legent bourbon, 1 ounce simple syrup, 1 ounce lemon juice, 2 to 3 strawberries mashed, egg white thrown in, all dry shaken, and then garnished with strawberry and a little bit of ice just to keep it cold, in addition to a chilled glass. So it is fucking awesome. And you can tell just by the look of the drink, mashing the strawberries does not make it look anemic like we talked about the last time that I had this. Mm-hmm. It no longer looks like that light brown that kind of looked before, and instead really has kind of that purple hue. So yeah, it is
awesome.
fucking awesome. That bourbon is also the shot that I took right before the show in our pre-show. It is so good. Definitely going to be having more of that. To follow that up, I have a Sycamore Brewing Company, which is out of North Carolina here. Slurricane, which has this nice little fucking cloud on it, which is it's self-described as an IPA, but it is actually a hazy IPA when you read what's actually in it and like their brewing method. I think it's because they're the closest thing that they have in the area to Surly, if that makes sense. Sycamore is. So they're the most widely distributed craft beer place in the area. And because of that, I think they simplify some of these things. They kind of dumb it down for people because they're like, the IPA thing sells. So like, let's not worry about some of the sub-labeling so much. So they do often label other beers, but I think this is just on the fence enough. I haven't tried it yet, so we'll see if that is fucking delicious. Holy shit, what is in that? Blown away tropical haze swirling with notes of mandarin orange, stone fruits, and lime. This tastes like a fucking cocktail in a beer. Like it is.
I'm guessing
awesome. That's dangerous.
Does it give a hot bill at all? I bet you dollars to donuts that there is cashmere in that.
I bet there is. It does also has the cashmere sort of, what is it, like velvet? Smooth, like, it's got a texture to it, right?
Oh, like the actual, like fabric cashmere?
No, I'm talking the hop varietal. Generally, I always get like a...
Okay, I haven't had a ton of cashmere. I just know that every time I have it, it's blasting me away with mandarin orange.
Got it. But it's great. Really like it. Sycamore makes great stuff. I've drank quite a bit of their stuff on the show. Candy Mountain, Double Candy Mountain R2 that I know that I've had a lot. So, yeah, they're great.
Awesome.
Cool. So with that, let's move into PJ's predictions. PJ, we have a couple to talk about this week, now that we're back to kind of keeping proper track of these again and everything. So we've got the first one here. Elend splits from the table after a brief conversation with Vin, picking up his books, and heads over to share the conversation with house rivals. The question is, what do you think are Elend's true intentions, given what we find out about him over the course of the chapter? You said...
My prediction was maybe he's impatient and wants to take out his own house to allow himself to rise faster. Nope. We get a pretty clear message from his perspective that he wants to lead his house and he has no ill intent towards anyone in his family, as far as I can tell. So,
yeah.
Cheers.
Yeah, so you got the wrong inkling on Elend. So drink. Mm-hmm. Excellent. Cruel and unusual punishment here on the show. We're following that up with...
Oh, darn, I'm drinking on the show.
Oh, darn it, drinking on the show. So the next one, what will the consequences of Yeden's actions here be? I need to clarify that. What will the consequences of Yeden's actions here be? I'm so glad that we don't have to say his name anymore. I assume the crew... you said... What did you say? Jesus Christ.
So in context, this is regarding the army being deployed, essentially, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So I assume the crew will infiltrate the garrison, and Kelsier and Vin will scout ahead, trying to do what they can to assist the rebellion. If this was an attack by Yeden, I think he'll be entirely replaced as a leader of the resistance.
And
there was, I guess, Ham kind of infiltrated the garrison, but we knew that ahead of time and didn't even make it all the way up there. And Kelsier and Vin scouted ahead for sure. Did not do anything to help, and Vin stopped Kelsier from jumping in to the fray in general. Yeden was not addressed, correct? Like, are we to assume that he died or was captured?
Yeden was declared dead.
Okay.
Yeah. That they found his body, basically.
Gotcha.
That there were scouts that found the body. That was in kind of the post running into Demu part. So
right.
Yeah.
So I guess that's right. He'll be replaced as leader.
Yes, that does seem to be correct. I would agree with you in both cases there. Well, that's fun.
It does not quite line up with. None of that really lines up with the spirit of what I was guessing. So
yes, yeah. There's kind of an incorrect assumption there. So take your little sippy poo.
Dude, I really like this cocktail.
Yeah.
I really like it.
You're going through it at a breezy pace.
I'm going through it way slower than I wanted to.
That's fair. That's fair.
I think the other thing to make note of with the rosemary sprig, a lot of aromatics to it. So if you can, include that. Anyway, that's it.
Cool. So with that, we jump right into our breakdown, starting with chapter 25. And I wanted to reread last week's epigram here, just because, or logbook, epigram, whatever you want to call it. So at the very top of chapter 25, we have, "No man dies by my hand or command, except that I wish there had been another way. Still, I kill them. Sometimes I wish that I weren't such a cursed realist." This is really interesting when paired up against what we kind of see over the course of this chapter, which is sort of like Kelsier's reaction, feels very similar to the Lord Ruler's logbook in a way here. So Kelsier basically is going to go pull no punches and go kill, right? Like he is out for blood basically to go take back the garrison, even though that isn't the correct choice. And the Lord Ruler in the logbook actually did kind of behave that way, even under different circumstances. Like it's a difference of like, the Lord Rulers almost has this interesting cruel tone to it that we kind of talked a little bit about last week. Like it feels very cruel compared to a lot of the other things and realistic in a real gritty way, versus Kelsier is like passionate and driven that way. It's a little bit of a...
So I got the exact opposite feel out of it. I felt like the Lord Ruler came off as not wanting to, but feeling like he had to. Whereas Kelsier's was wanting to, even though it probably wouldn't have worked that well. You know, like it felt like the Lord Rulers was based entirely on like devoid of emotion, whereas Kelsier's was entirely emotionally driven.
That's a much better way to put what it... Yeah. Yes.
Yep.
Agreed. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So the context there then is like the emotionality difference between the two, which is interesting considering what we know about the characters, right? Like the Lord Ruler now is a very cruel person versus like, but is that also potentially emotionless, like the way he kind of behaves, you know?
Assuming the Lord Ruler still exists.
You're assuming the Lord Ruler doesn't exist?
We don't see him.
Jesus Christ. We feel his presence and we see an outline. So we start this... A mannequin in the window. We start this week in almost a panic from Kelsier's perspective, rolling through and laying out what must be done to react to Eden's decision with the army, including what Kelsier is really kind of leaning into and accepting the fact that he can no longer really control Vin and that she's sort of been bound to come with and follow him regardless.
Yeah. This is certainly a panicked introduction to the week section. And I know for a fact that you choose very particularly where we start and end each episode, so thank you.
It does give it a sense of urgency.
It does. It absolutely does. I've been really appreciating the way that you've been chunking this out. So, but anyway, I think this is not only an important realization about Vin, but great development for Kelsier as a mentor to her. Like, he seems to be giving her more credit as a Mistborn and is starting to see her as sort of a peer as opposed to like a strictly like student, you know? This obviously happens later on, but when Vin calls him out and mentions that he's not invincible, it actually gives him pause. And to me, that shows that he is listening and actually respects her and is like, she's being elevated beyond the pupil status in his mind.
Yeah, from pupil to peer, right? Like that's really kind of the change. It's not full that way, but it does have at the very least like a little bit of that context where he's taking her opinion a lot more seriously.
Right.
Yeah. I would definitely... Yeah, I feel like she's making a move towards peer. She isn't actually there yet by any stretch of the imagination, but
yeah.
She's definitely grown significantly enough to feel like she can even voice her opinion when, you know, I don't think that's something she ever would have done or tried before.
Yeah.
So, but then we get pewter dragging, and we get this running. We get this crazy adrenaline-laced scene of running through the streets of Luthadel, jumping over the walls and launching. And holy shit, is this just such a cool combination of moments here, because it kind of breaks with the training that we've come to understand with pewter and like resist dragging. Like we talked about the effects, it's generally negative. Mostly overusing these effects have negative consequences on you in the long term. But 16 hours of running, to be precise, that they experience. It also gives like a brief explanation as to why mistcloaks are as important as they are. They inform others that these are Mistborn that are running through the streets, so that they get the fuck out of the way as sort of the social cue. And yeah, they don't want to get charged over by a bull. So, you know, if you see the tassels coming.
Dude, how much would it suck to get hit by somebody running like that? Just the absolute absurdity of what they're able to put themselves through with pewter means that they also probably wouldn't feel it if they hit you.
No, right. Upon impact, it would be as though you were hit by like a steel boulder and like you're done. You know, I'm imagining the like pigeon in baseball, like the pitcher that pitches the baseball and just destroys the pigeon, turns it into feathers, but like people.
Yep.
Or like, have you seen the first episode of The Boys?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when what's his name runs through his girlfriend, same thing.
Yep.
Right. Same idea. Like it would be.
I think
really
it'd
bad.
be a little bit less vapory, maybe less pulpy. I don't know.
Would it be less pulpy?
I don't think you disintegrate the person.
No, I don't think you would disintegrate them, but I do think you would pulp them. More like pulp at the bottom of your orange juice glass, you know? Like juice and pulp. Yeah, bad time. Bad time.
Either way, bad time. But I feel like this description really kind of expands the magic system to a certain extent and gives us more detail on the power and resulting drawbacks of pushing the system that we're living in, this allomancy system, a bit harder than normal. And saying a bit harder in this context is maybe a little bit of an understatement, but the fact that that exists gives me like even more respect for the system that we're working.
Yeah. We talked about this very early on in the show, but we directly compared a lot of the metals to each other, right? Like we talked about how they are opposites in a lot of ways. This is where we kind of actually understand where tin and pewter are opposites, because pewter like bolsters internally or like your external response to things, but also like makes you numb. It dulls your senses to a point as well, where like you don't feel pain, you're actively resisting pain. Whereas tin enhances your senses and makes everything extra sensory. So that's where this pairing really comes from. And it's not something that you can really explain with the explanation of pewter being increased strength. Pewter has increased everything, musculature, and like a deadening of nerves at the same time because of the effect of pewter dragging. So it really creates them as these effective opposites.
Yeah, but also complements. Because do we know, can pewter dragging happen without having tin to lean on?
Yes, pewter dragging can happen without tin to lean on.
To this extent, though?
Ham talked about thugs overdoing it with pewter dragging and then like dying basically when they turned it off because they weren't aware or able to be aware. So it's much more dangerous for a non-Mistborn, to your point.
Yeah, like the complements between the two are really, really cool. So
yeah, they're much more direct than like we couldn't really get into it that much because you kind of need the rest of this before you really get the full picture. But
right, yeah.
So they're running this incredible long way, pewter dragging, going so fast, so far, you know, taking 4 basically to fuel an hour, 4 pewter pellets, I think, to fuel like an hour worth of running, and just like keep going and going and going to the point of where they arrive. Vin is like exhausted at the point of like an odd pass out, but, you know, is basically told by Kelsier to flare tin to stay awake, alive, you know, the responding properly to not drop the pewter despite the exhaustion, because then it would all really catch up with her. And we arrive to the scene of slaughter of the army, and it's a painful watch. It's painful for Kelsier, like we had talked about, and almost that feels like it could have led to his death if Vin would have been so insistent to have came along considering his headstrong nature. Thankfully Vin is here, of course, to talk sense into him. I think for both characters, this is kind of that pivot point that we talked a little bit about earlier, already. But what do you make of their exchange and the sort of honesty of the conversation that they're able to have here now?
Yeah, I guess we discussed it a little bit in a couple different contexts. One in between Vin and Kelsier, but in two between Kelsier and the Lord Ruler. But I'll I guess a little bit more directly expand on it. Obviously, this situation is really difficult to see, and we really get to see Kelsier's willingness to go and sacrifice himself for whatever cause that he feels strongly for. And we see that his decision making is so heart-based. And Vin, alternatively, is able to sort of balance that. She's naturally untrusting from what we've seen, and generally seems less emotional in her decision-making process. So being able to call each other out for these instances makes for a really, really cool pairing.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's almost like they're paired like the metals are. Like maybe the characters are paired that way.
Weird.
Could it be?
Why?
Like Hammond and Breeze are kind of a pair?
Why would that happen? Why would they do anything like that?
Why is this whole thing about like a duology of personalities, huh? It is an interesting theme, though, that does run from like the very beginning of this chapter through that epigram, the logbook, all the way to the end of this part, basically. And it's been going on this whole time, but it's put into, we just have so much more context now that we can kind of see the stricter terms as the characters have developed themselves.
So, just thinking on that, I'm going to make a wild, crazy prediction that probably won't come true or not true for maybe ever. But hear me out. Vin is the Lord Ruler through some crazy overuse of gold. And she is some weird alternate timeline of the Lord Ruler.
Okay, all right. I wrote that prediction down because fuck you if I'm not holding you accountable to that. That is 100% staying as a prediction because that's a prediction. So that is just a wild prediction. I like where your head's at with gold, right? Because gold is this interesting kind of foreign
that nobody understands.
Yeah. So,
but clearly has something to do. We'll talk about gold later.
Yeah. We've got some stuff to talk about between the extra metals, but after the confrontation and we kind of see the way that the fight ends, Vin suggests going to go check out the caves just to see if anyone remained behind. And we find a small contingent of soldiers chose to remain in the cave because they didn't believe that what Yeadon was doing correct, led, of course, by Demu. And he almost feels, he's got this interesting tone about him. He feels almost shameful about deciding to stand behind because he's like, we thought that it was the right thing to do for you. We didn't necessarily agree with Yeadon, although now we feel shame because, like, at the same time, we know they're going out and fighting for the righteous cause. They feel very mixed about this, but they saved a good chunk of the army's lives. What do you make of kind of Demu's decision to stay behind?
I mean, there's obviously hindsight that tells them that it was the smart move.
Right.
But I think that's also where the guilt comes from. But I think it's always important to have a contingent reserve of, like, in a situation like this, why would you put your entire force towards something just in case, you know? Like you want that reserve in case something goes incredibly wrong like it does here, unless it's an absolute, like, last stand, all out, we win or we die situation.
Yeah, I understand that, but are you suggesting that Yeadon suggested doing that? Because I don't think Yeadon...
No, but I think maybe his head wasn't in the...
demure demeanor. I just thought that fucking shit up. It was too good to not say out loud.
Fuck, dude. I think his decision-making process, maybe that's why he's feeling conflicted, because... Mm-hmm. It wasn't necessarily strategic why he stayed back, but... No,
it's more of a moral decision. Like, yeah. He's definitely... I don't know.
I don't know what I think. From. I think it was the right move, and I think... Fuck, man. I don't know now. I was approaching it from the wrong direction, and I'm really not sure what to think now. But I'm glad he didn't.
Because you're thinking about it from like the entire Rebel side of things.
Yeah, I was thinking about it from like an RTS perspective.
RTS all in all the time, baby. I don't know what you're thinking. What you're talking about. A move.
A
Right
move.
click that shit. Send the mutas into the front of the base. Don't use them strategically to pick off stuff on the back line. I don't know what you mean. What you mean. Why did I... Anyway. Okay, so, yeah, Demue's whole... I'm so glad that this is so easy to edit out. So, Demue... I need to reground myself. Give me one moment. Okay. Beyond the conversation with Demue and kind of them keeping with the theme and discussion of kind of the pain and loss that they experience here, there's Kelsier feels a lot of this on his shoulders, right? It's an internal discussion that he kind of has with himself about being responsible for the death of 5,000 odd troops, and ultimately he pins it all on himself as his own fault and consequence of his actions to sort of inspire the men and make them believe that they could be more, even through the things such as heroically manipulating Demue into this sort of superhero-like, able to beat the odds capability. You know, it kind of gave them, again, sort of the inverse view, their own Lord Ruler that's like for them in a way, that gave them that inspiration. Well, we've got our own God. And it's interesting considering that this is also a failure point for the plan. This is where the heist that we've been building towards this entire story seems to have really kind of fallen apart. So what do you make of his reaction and in turn the conversation that he has with Menace, the man from the prologue at the beginning of the story?
So I think it takes us back to the heart of Kelsier, I guess, the emotionality of him and what motivates him. And him taking everything so personally means that he is motivated to get things done. But it also means that it's taxing on him. But the whole thing is simultaneously motivating and depressing, you know?
Yeah, it is. It is really interesting because he does get the internal reflection on his failure of leadership, although I think maybe he's overdoing it a little bit, and I think that's Menace's interesting perspective on this whole thing, right? Is that like, well, don't completely blame yourself because you actually created the most successful uprising in hundreds of years right here. Like, right. This was the most success that we've ever experienced. But the end of Menace's perspective is like, you did this really successful thing. Now it's time to pack it in and move home. Like it's time to be done. Like you gave inspiration to a generation and made it so that like we aren't going quietly into the night. But yeah, Kelsier obviously disagrees with that, and this isn't the give up point here.
Right. I think another thing I wanted to bring up was my initial reaction to the scene was that I was surprised that Kelsier didn't recognize Menace. But then I realized that he's been doing this for way longer than we've been seeing him do this. And Menace was just another guy that he had a conversation with. It wasn't necessarily a special situation. Like, maybe it was a little bit more special than some because, like, obviously he burned the fucking place down. But overall, I'm sure he's had a bunch of conversations very similar to the one he had with Menace, with other ska, like, I wouldn't even call it a patriarch, but other ska people within households throughout the countryside. So that was kind of a cool, eye-opening thing for me, seeing that.
Yeah, I think it is interesting to your point because like Kelsier has done so much of this work variously. This is just the unique one that we actually got to see the inside of. You know, there's so many times that we get little time skips, you know, here or there, like we're about to experience one that's another 15 days of which we don't know exactly what's going on, you know, in the foreground of the story. So it's not as though Kelsier hasn't been doing other things, or it's not as though he hasn't been liberating plantations. He was beforehand. We kind of know that was not the only case in Trusting's case that, you know, he went ahead and did that. So it's just cool to kind of see that full circle right here. And also know that like Menace did follow through and join the rebellion. Like they were headed to the caves, but also they made it to the caves.
Yeah.
So
yeah, exactly.
It's kind of nice to have that on a prologue. So cool. With that, we move into part 4, unless you have anything else inside of this chapter.
No, I think that covers it.
Cool. So with that, we move into part 4, Dancers in a Sea of Mist. Any thoughts on the like little title here for part 4? Anything in particular?
I'm still working that out. I'm not sure yet.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Interesting. We'll see how it unfolds. I like the name. I'll tell you that much. I think that it's like most of these sections, it is a very eloquent name. So, yeah, I do enjoy. With that, we go into chapter 26. And the journal entry for this little chapter is so nice, sweet, and short. It is just simply, I am growing so very tired. Period. And to be honest, same Lord Ruler, I am so tired. I am so exhausted. Stayed up way too late last night. But it also rolls pretty seamlessly into what's going on with Vin, the absolute abject exhaustion from her 15 days, for the last 15 days from pewter dragging, doing all this crazy running and the absolute exhaustion that she's experiencing.
Yeah, obviously some of these journal entries have started to relate more and more to the actual story. This one's pretty on the nose, dude.
This one is so very on the nose. I actually forgot about it until I was rereading it, because when you're listening to it in the audiobook, it goes so quickly that you're like, wait, there wasn't more? It's there and it's gone. And so I had to double back, because when I was going through notes today, I had the text in front of me, but then I was also listening and kind of multitasking and getting some other stuff done. So I went to the book and I flipped it open. And I'm like, was that really it? And I was like, yeah, okay, that was really it. That's all. It's perfect. It's well done. But yeah, I love it. And I think the context that we get here is also great. So it's awesome. So we immediately transition from the like I am so very tired like sleeping exhaustion into Vin's new self-care routine, right? It's really something to strive for in 2022, you know, like we're new year, new me, right? And Vin is kind of experiencing that whole thing throughout the story as well. This is a great point to kind of talk about that. Between like her bath, her appreciation for the accompanying scents that she used to shy away from, and cleanliness, and then she tops it all off by demanding a beer at noon. Heck yeah.
Fuck yes. I think one thing to make note of is, I want to say the quote is something like, I'm glad Breeze's assistants remembered to run me a bath. She is absolutely leaning into her ladyship. But beer at noon is absolutely the type of self-care that I want to get more attention. And beyond that,
we stand a lunch beer.
I think 9 a.m. old fashions need to also be destigmatized.
In the same camp as a Bloody Mary or a mimosa. It's fine, guys.
Yeah.
We just want something rich to kick off the morning.
Exactly.
I'm shocked that you didn't go with like a coffee cocktail, to be honest. I was thinking through and I was like, yeah, all right, we're just going hard right away in the morning. Not hard. We're going appropriate right away in the morning.
This is medicine, Crossland.
Taking my medicine at 9 a.m. before you're going to class or work or what have you. The confrontation that we get after she goes downstairs and goes, ale now, please, between Breeze, Kelsier, and the rest of the crew, I think is a really shocking one compared to how the rest of this chapter kind of opens in these like high overtones of kind of groggy hangover, you know, that's sort of the reality that she's facing right here. But then we get into this really deep, dark confrontation between Breeze, Kelsier, and the rest of the crew, basically saying that, you know, they're in a tough spot and that basically the job is over, as we'd kind of surmised at the end of chapter 25. And Vin definitely empathizes with that position. What'd you make of kind of Breeze's point in the subsequent conversation before we head to the Fountain Square?
I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that Kelsier has no intention, but it's not his goal to steal all the ATM that he's been promising. Like, I'm sure that's, I guess I'm approaching this from like the first time I read this. And so without the context of later on, but like, it seems like he's pretty clearly acting not quite in that interest. But like, it feels like his desire to go towards the ATM and his promise of it is more to do with having the stores of ATM to try to take down the Lord Ruler later. Like, that's a means to the end as opposed to the end with the side quest of killing the Lord Ruler, you know? I don't know. It's just
that was kind of the way that it was pitched, right? Is that the side quest was the Lord Ruler thing, when in reality for Kelsier, the Lord Ruler thing was the whole thing the whole time.
Right. I don't know if it was pitched that way, because Breeze explicitly says you have no intention of getting the atium. And I don't think that's true either. I think he intends to get the atium, but not for the sake of riches, for the sake of using it.
Yeah, using it as either currency to destabilize the economy or what have you, like just having it, as kind of a freewheeling tool.
I'm thinking like offensively against the Lord Ruler, having a store of atium that's basically infinite to constantly see what's coming ahead, or to. You get what I'm saying? Like,
I do get what you're saying. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
No, I track.
Okay. Yeah,
that makes sense. Yeah. I think he doesn't even pitch it that way here. He pitches it as like ATM's a side benefit, like regardless.
Right.
So I think ever since the introduction of the 11th metal, to some degree, that's kind of been our hint throughout the story that like Kelsier's deeper involvement is definitely directed towards the Lord Ruler, and this is sort of the cementation of that idea that like he had, it would have been great, and it would have been an additional thing that he would have given out money to everyone, but that was never his holistic goal.
Yeah. It seems odd to me that they all were under that impression to begin with. Yeah,
because they were able to read him, but they were also okay with it. Like everyone,
they weren't able to read it because Breeze is calling him out for it here. He's like, "What the fuck? Like that's not your intention anymore."
I don't know. He is calling him out here for it, but they had been kind of making these comments about either the like ego behind the decision to like go after the Lord Ruler and other things like that kind of point in the direction of the primary goal not being to pull off the heist of ATM. Right, to like not get them paid. And this is really a direct confrontation of the fact that like A, it's impossible, and B, this was clearly never your goal, and we're finally breaching the subject. Because everyone had been kind of having these inklings of either it being ego, is he trying to like outdo him, is he trying to supplant the the Lord Ruler? What exactly is his goal here?
Right.
Yeah. It's kind of all there. Like that's kind of the question, and everyone's at different levels, and I think Breeze is he was less, well, obviously he's very direct here, but he was less direct about those feelings, wherein Doxson, I think, was sharing a lot of thoughts and feelings about like his thoughts on Kelsier's egotism, especially with Vin and Ham.
Yeah,
they both had that kind of going on. So this is Breeze's time to like question. He does it directly. He questions Kelsier himself, because that's kind of his personality, right? He's more, especially given his misting trait, he is more of a direct confrontation person, even if he's bending your will a little bit, of which also leads to an interesting never soothe me again Breeze threat, of which feels like a lethal threat, like do not fuck with.
Yeah, that was a little bit more severe than what we've seen in the past.
Yeah, that was very, very seriously like, don't you dare. It's terrifying. So we then move, of course, to the Fountain Square, and we kind of see the grouping and all of the people that are pushed out. We see the obligators and steel ministry basically going through and pushing people out of houses, the men out of houses, to ensure that they are there to witness the execution. And this like grouping up for the execution is like a large kind of wild thing, considering like our society and what it is. Death as a punishment for not attending is intense, and this feels just like another cog and a gear in the cog of the suppression that is like the Lord Ruler. Any thoughts on the practice that he displays here and how that fits into the power structure of oppression that the Ska experience?
I mean, I think it perfectly fits the power structure.
Right.
Grand displays like this would go a long way in cementing the Lord Ruler's power in the minds of the oppressed through fear and spectacle. Like, this feels like something perfect for a theocracy,
Especially a theocracy through fear, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, through which fear is kind of the leading driving force. And a living theocracy, I think, is the important part. Like, your God is alive. Like, that's the other part that's wild. So, like, theocracy almost doesn't, like, yes, it is a theocracy, for sure. But that's only because we also have never experienced a living God, so there isn't a term to determine, you know what I mean? Like, there's not a physical manifestation of a godly presence guiding the government as well. Like, if any of the religions were correct,
I mean,
and on
Vatican.
Earth, you know what I mean? No, that's not the same. That's like, we're talking about God itself manifest in some capacity.
Isn't that the idea? The Pope, though, is like a conduit?
No, that's like the ear of the mouthpiece of God. That'd be like the mouth of Sauron.
Okay. Fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, good point.
This is just a step further than that in theory. Like, the Lord Prelin is more like the Pope, if that makes sense. That would be my comparison.
Okay. There we go.
Yeah.
So Vin is a popelet.
A popelet, yes, which is illegal. Just like it would be illegal for the Pope to have a popelet. It'd be very illegal for the Pope to have a popelet. I think I talked to Sharkbait about this week, one of our patrons.
Did you use the term popelet?
No, it was something about the Pope not getting off, and it was terrible. It's a really bad joke. It was great in context, but here we are repeating it without full context. So, yeah.
You know, it's still pretty great.
Yeah, it's still really funny. Because Pope jokes are hilarious. He's got a little car. He's got a big hat. And
does he still have a little car? Does he still have a big hat?
I don't think Francis wears the big hat often, but I think the big hat does exist. Also, Pope Francis. What a name. Okay. Like, lighten up, Francis. Like, I don't know. It's just, there's just so many lines. Anyway, the point being, the Lord Ruler is terrifying. The Pope is kind of funny. All right. But we also find out as we transition into the rest of this scene that we have 8 Steel Inquisitors in one place. Out of the 20, as we've kind of identified them, many of the obligators marshaling around the people as we spoke about. And we see among them the Lord Prelin, of whom we just talked about, Tavidian, Vin's father, the leader of the obligators, highest ranking of the Steel Ministry, the allegory to the Pope in this circumstance, as we just made clear. And man, this gives, like, the car that is Vin a whole new layer of backstory paint, you know? Like, it's like an undercoat of paint that, like, it is both cool and important in quotes, but it doesn't really matter to her character because she's so separated from her father, being the orphan that she is. But she is still the orphan to the second most senior ranking man in the Empire, underneath only the Lord Ruler himself. Does that make sense? Does my metaphor make sense there? Like,
yeah. So
it's there, it's cool, but it's not ultimately crazy impactful to her personally.
So there's a couple things that I want to touch on here. Mm-hmm. With him being... So, first of all, this is all under the assumption that Reen knew what he was talking about when he showed Vin who her father was. Like, that is... We're assuming that. I don't know if I'd buy it, but that's what we're assuming. Based on how high of a ranking officer that he is, I feel like it's kind of unbelievable to assume that he was completely unaware of her mother's pregnancy and is therefore completely unaware of Vin's existence. So maybe he doesn't know exactly who she is and like what she looks like now, but I find it kind of hard to believe that could go under the radar. You know? Being that high ranking, like, he's got to be that much more careful because he's going to be that much more scrutinized.
Yeah, and you could call it kind of lackadaisical. One of the things that I find interesting with the sort of story that we have so far, right, is that we know that Reen is her brother, but that the Lord Prelin isn't her father. Like, we do know that from early context. So he is, in fact, her half-brother, but brother who raised her. You know, it's all relative.
Wait, we know that the Lord Prelin isn't his father. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, we do know that. Yeah, we do know that. We don't necessarily have strict details on Vin's younger sister. So that's a question mark.
Right.
Right? So that's the question of, like, maybe this was a repeat and it was his one that he, like, kept in the closet to some degree, you know?
That's a good point. Didn't think about that.
Yeah. That's kind of like a complex reread of that situation now that we have all this additional information, because most of that was given to us in, like, chapter 4. So we haven't thought about it or talked about it in a long time, but I do agree with you. I think it is interesting because it does paint that pregnancy as a much more complex thing that it was kind of presented to us at first, now that we have all of this other context about Tavidian.
Yeah.
And also that his name is Tavidian.
Better than Francis.
Much better than Francis.
Sorry to any
regal.
Francises out there.
Sorry to any Francis who's listening to us, or vaguely anyone who's Catholic. Apologies. We are both ex-Catholics, so we have feelings. I don't mean to insult your faith so far as I think that it's funny that the Pope does these silly things.
Yeah. I mean to insult your faith.
They're funny. Okay. in the novel series that is so clearly about faith in various contexts, we're just like, yeah, I'm just gonna shit on that real quick. Give me a second. So, but then of course we're inside of this scene, inside of the fountain, and we cut to the black carriage kind of pushing through the crowd and people separating for it, and this choking sense of soothing that, as it's described, actually reminds me of like if Darth Vader could like put a turtleneck choke on everyone. It's kind of like how I imagine this impacting a whole crowd.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Like turtleneck, like just a light choke.
You glossed over something that I think you glossed over something that I thought was really, really cool visually.
Yeah.
The two giant white horses that were pulling this carriage.
Oh yeah, good point.
Like, that's a cool visual.
Especially given the kind of the visual nature of ash falling from the sky and everything else in like this dark world, these like clean white horses. Right? Like that's a level of regality and nobility that only the Lord Ruler would have. Yeah,
but I saw it almost more spectral and almost.
Oh yeah,
like not actually spiritual, like not like an actual spirit, but just more daunting and more. I don't know.
Again, it's like a foreign kind of like. I think spectral is a good way of putting it. Like it's not as though they're like literally mist wraiths, but it is a foreign, strange concept.
Yeah, out of place.
Yeah. Out of place for sure. But the Lord Ruler is there giving those tiny little turtleneck chokes to everyone. At the same time, Vin seems to still feel his touch on her emotions through burning her copper. She can still feel that penetrating, that protective presence that she should have. And he's, of course, showing up here to execute the women and children, of whom are just being blamed for the rebellion. Not that they had any part to do with it. These are just basically executions for show of force, selected at random examples. This is a lot to kind of meditate on, but what are some of your thoughts around this?
So, first of all, that's fucked.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
The tiny turtlenecks, like, on everyone, that's really
like,
fucked.
Who would do that? They're not even that good looking.
They're definitely not that good looking. Like, why wouldn't you just wear a fucking dress shirt?
Wear a tie, hippie.
Yeah. Damn it, Steve Jobs. It was a dying trend.
So, I think what's really interesting to me about her feeling his touch on her emotions through the copper, there's her kind of questioning it later, like is she just assuming that she would feel it because of how powerful he is and like it's a placebo effect essentially. I don't think that's true. I think what's going on here is we're understanding that copper isn't a binary power. It's not just on or off. It's just so much more powerful than anything else that you have to have something super insanely powerful to overcome it. And the Lord Ruler is able to do that just innately. That's my take on it. I don't know. That has implications later as well.
Well, maybe we should talk about that a little bit right now, because I think that it's important to kind of talk about this.
Yeah. So there's that. There's like how is she able, or how are the Steel Inquisitors waiting for them in that room when they infiltrated Creedic Shaw.
You almost said Carmen Shaw. Shout out to our English teacher.
Ew. But if he's got this like all-seeing power just around him that detects allomancy, for example, he'll always know when somebody's coming in, even through copper, if it's powerful enough. I don't know. That's where I was going with all that.
Got it. We get a little bit later here, too, that we understand that allomancy's powers are sort of bounded by the amount of metal and the time in which, like, metals pretty much work the same for everyone. There's no real difference in allomantic ability. It's really more to do with your physical skill. Like, no one is necessarily stronger in a metal than anyone else, right? We learned that about allomancy. But ferrochemy...
But we do know that people are able to be like more in tune with it and more perceptive to things. You know? Like, Vin is able to pick out very intricate God, what was it? Was it the conversation with Marsh?
Yeah,
where
the
he was
bronze,
surprised
her
with
bronze
how
capability.
Yeah. Like there is a granularity to it and a perception to it that can be tuned, and you can practice that, but the strength, I guess, doesn't change.
Yes, right. That was kind of the point there, is that there shouldn't be a discernible difference as we learn the rules from Kelsier. Like, everyone in theory should have the same bounds. The upper bounds of Allomancy are the same. Feruchemy is decided by the amount that is stored in the metal and the quickness with which someone consumes that ability. So if you've got something like speed stored, you could run really fast for a short period of time, or just a little bit faster for a longer period of time, as it's explained. So with that assumption, like, you could change all kinds of things. However, we also know from that little bit of feruchemy that there's no soothing within feruchemy. Like, there's no soothing equivalent affecting things externally, because you're just storing things internally for your own use later. You can't impact other people with feruchemy, so far as it's been described, I should say.
Right.
But you can't impact other people. So that's an interesting bound of the power that doesn't seem to line up with how the Lord Ruler's using it, right? Because he's using soothing at such a higher degree than anyone else is.
Yeah.
And so you'd think that, I guess, like, what do you think? Maybe that's the better, like, throwing it back to you now that we're talking about this and we have all the other kind of context.
So there's a whole lot of new context in this section.
Yes.
And I guess I can bring in something from later on. It seems like Kelsier is insinuating that Allomancy existed before the Ascension.
I think he's assuming.
It's an assumption, sure.
Yes, right.
But then there's also the comment from the Lord Ruler talking about...
In the logbook, right?
In the logbook.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
that's the only time that we've seen her talk to the Lord Ruler.
Yeah, where he comments on, like, direct interaction with the deepness, like telepathically or something. It's not really described how, but, like, there is something fucky here that's different, and I don't know what it is, but, like, that's a power that we haven't seen or heard described before, of, like, interacting with somebody telepathically. I was under the impression that Allomancy existed because of the Ascension, based on the term misting and Mistborn, because I know we know that the mist came from the Ascension as well, or we assume. I can't remember if that was confirmed or not, but, like, the mist didn't exist before that.
We assume the logbook for the most part, you know? Like,
yeah, like, I know there are a bunch of really, like, crucial missing puzzle pieces here, and I'm trying my best
to, like, put them together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To, like, doodle the little missing part of the picture.
Yeah. So to get back to what we were talking about as well, just, like, circling back to what we were saying, we have this supreme power that seems to be able to push through copper burning, which we talked about a little bit with the tiny turtlenecks everywhere, and even that feeling still when burning bronze. And then on top of that, we have the sort of random executions. Do you have any thoughts on the executions outside of the sort of horrifying nature?
I mean, this is kind of the perfect situation to motivate the crew to, like, go along with Kelsier's actual plan, you know?
Yeah, I mean, the combination of, like, put 4 people up on the pedestal, behead them, bleed them into the pool so that everyone can see, because now it's flowing downward, and so people can see the blood. Wait until their bodies stop bleeding, take the next 4, do it again, take the next 4, do it again, is also a very Dune thing. This is maybe the one thing that feels the most referential to me. It's a very small scene in the movie, but do you remember the Sardaukar, the soldiers, when they're like sitting there and they're like walking through the giant field of gray, and there's the like throat singing that's going on, that we're like, it's a didgeridoo, it's actually throat singing. Remember that bit?
Yeah.
So in the book, all of these Sardaukar who don't make the cut, basically, or the people who are trying out to be Sardaukars, become the blood that are painted on the actual Sardaukars as a part of like a ritual sacrifice. And so the river of blood basically flows between so that the priest can pick up the blood with their hands and dab it on the armor and the face and whatnot. And this feels very similar. Like not a perfect one-to-one, but it feels similar enough in reference and kind of reverence and power in sort of this interesting mystical way, because the Sardaukar are the Emperor's force, and at the same time, these are executions on behalf of the Emperor here, the Emperor, the Lord Ruler. So, yeah.
Okay. I don't know if I see that connection so much in the way you describe it, but I'm also coming at it without having actually read Dune, so...
Yeah, I guess I'm taking the scene that you saw, which is... It is truly like that imagery is more like for fans, if that makes sense. Like the images of the upside-down bodies that they're bled to death, so that then the blood can be used in the armor, is more of like a ritual thing for that. But this is it just feels reminiscent. It's not a one-to-one, but it feels, especially with the amount that I know that Sanderson loves Dune. I think it's his second favorite book series behind The Wheel of Time. It feels inspired.
That's fair.
But
either way,
of course,
fucked, dude,
fucked. Super fucked. The obsidian axes too, like that idea of like pulling them up and then chopping them down, and of course they're not made of metal. They're again the glass axes to kind of get at them. And yeah, it also is this moment for Kelsier to have this very powerful speech to accompany it about the nobility and sort of the nobility not reacting to what's going on in front of them, right? The lack of reaction, some of them even like being happy and jovial about it. Vin looks over, doesn't see Elend being that, and like his group of young noblettes, I think, are not reacting in the same kind of way, so she feels a little bit there. But he uses this as a moment to be like, the nobility standing idly by, and it's sort of this preamble to what is going to come, which is action to work on a plan. And they all agree that despite the failure of the original plan and heist, they now have a rebellion to effectively effect.
Yeah. I mean, the timing couldn't have been better, you know? There's the confrontation that gets cut short by this, that I'm sure a lot of the crew members would still be on board with this explanation, but having this visual just cements it, you know?
Yeah. It's very powerful. Like, this entire scene is, again, I think this world can feel, it's so well described in like contexts, and characters are well developed, and we get a lot of different kind of nuances of story, but sometimes we can get like pulled a little bit too far away from the scene. We've talked about kind of the way that Brandon Sanderson reels us back into making sure that we understand the stakes, especially. So like the killing of the Ska child outside of the party was one example. This is another example to get us rooted in the reality of the problem and get us removed from sort of the day-to-day drama almost of sorts that we otherwise experience from the crew. So this is just the most grand version of that. This is that elevated. Excuse me. So we get the plan taking shape after this massive setback to move us forward. With the garrison gone, it's time to ignite the house war, seize the ATM, and in turn pay the garrison mercenaries to work for them to take down the Lord Ruler. The game is afoot, as they say. Afoot?
Afoot!
1 foot. A singular foot.
In this moment, I am so excited to see more houses just precariously set and ready to topple, you know, and ready to get like exploded into a war with the other houses. It's satisfying to see this setup. It's super fun. So I'm excited to see more of it.
Yeah, and especially with the way that the next chapter starts to set up some of those cards, right? We start to see the House of Cards potentially building for some of this house collapse. It's interesting. I totally agree with you. We're starting to set that stage really dramatically. We're pulling the blocks out of the bottom of the Jenga tower here. Yeah. It's a small detail as well, but Vin identifying him as the man from the logbook, the Lord Ruler, of course, and also never having his face revealed in the scene, we kind of talked about it earlier, is kind of a really clever play on Sanderson's part, I think, keeping the big bad shrouded and not revealed to us seemingly at the same time. Like, he's here, but it's not fully him. You know what I mean? Like, we haven't seen behind the curtain yet.
Yeah. It certainly allows our imaginations to expand and fit the profile of actions of the Lord Ruler, rather than confining it to a specific physical description.
That's really interesting. That's a great way of putting that.
Yeah, it allows us to perceive him as a god, essentially, even when we know that he's a person as readers.
Yeah, because he's sitting in his little god mobile and executing these
blood pope.
Like, he's so powerful that he doesn't need to do the killing. He has other people do the killing, and he just is the presence that sits in the room and watches.
Yeah,
and saps everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, it's...
Yeah.
Take that, Francis.
Right. Take that, Francis. So with that, we move into chapter 27. We start off, of course, with our little logbook reading here. I think I've discovered why Rashik resents me so much. He does not believe that an outsider such as I, a foreigner, could possibly be the hero of ages. He believes that I have somehow tricked the philosophers, that I wear the piercings of the hero unjustly. According to Rashik, only a terraceman of pure blood should have been chosen as the hero. Oddly, I find myself more determined because of his hatred. I must prove to him that I can perform this task. I think that's a really interesting read here again, because it speaks of Rashik, but this time understanding kind of where Rashik's hate and anger a lot of this time has been coming from, his sort of resentment, as we hadn't understood it beforehand, and now how he believes and why he resents the Lord Ruler so much is he believes that only a terraceman could be the hero of ages, and that he wears the piercings and doesn't have the proper authority vested in him. What do you make of kind of this read?
It's kind of difficult to pin my thoughts on this, because we're confined to these, 26 passages, 27 passages, and a little bit of lore that we've gotten through Sazed. But it seems to me that he is perceiving this animosity now not as a personal attack, but as almost a function of their knowledge of the prophecy and how he doesn't perfectly line up with it. I mean, at the very least, that's a little bit of growth, you know? He's not being driven by rage. He seems to be understanding, I don't know. Do you get what I'm saying? It seems like his perspective is shifting a little bit to be upset at the prophecy, not the person. Whereas before it was well, what the fuck, dude? Why aren't you on my side anymore?
Are you talking about Quan or Rashik? Quan and Rashik are two different.
Oh, they are two different people.
I agree with you on the read of Quan. I think Rashik is a different thing.
Yeah. Oh, but Rashik, as far as I remember, the Lord Ruler, or the author of these passages, had been so much more personally upset at Rashik, and
Rashik had actually been personally upset at the Lord Ruler. It was not the other way around.
Okay,
that much.
Now I have to go back and reread it, but at the very least, it seemed like we didn't really see much animosity placed towards the prophecy, as opposed to the people interpreting it.
Yes, right. And Rashik, I agree with that read for sure, because Rashik is basically saying that, it is Quan's fault to some degree that I'm here right now, right? You could read it that way, where Rashik blames Quan for the state of which he finds himself in charge, and, being a Pac-Man for the Lord Ruler. It's this isn't right. You know, the hero of ages is self-described, is supposed to be a terraceman, and that doesn't make any sense. And that's sort of where this rage comes from.
Yeah. I need to go back and read all of these.
Every time I read one of these, the first time I was I need to go back and read all of them. Every time I got a new chunk of information, I was I want to restart reading them. And I was you're never going to go forward if you keep going back.
Yeah. So, I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, good point. Didn't even make that sort of differentiation.
It's tough, especially when you have all of these disconnects, right? So you have to try to keep in mind the flow, and especially given the fact that we read these at the rate that we do, it can be a little bit hard to keep that, that tracking going on.
Yeah.
Because these are meant to be the nuggets to pull you through to keep you reading. And I think they would if we didn't also have a structure and format that was, okay, PJ, take a break.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whole lot of take a break.
We're reading this at a faster clip, though, than we were Red Rising. So
that's true.
Which is You're getting better, is what I mean.
Oh, thanks.
You're welcome. So, but then we get to the very specific planning of what exactly has to happen in kind of the remaining portion of this first part, like what exactly they have to pull off. First up, of course, is the House War and House Venture. It is determined it needs to go, starting with Lord Straff Venture himself. It becomes Vin's goal to get this kind of into the house through Elend and figure out a way to kind of manipulate and play into that part of the plan.
Yeah, I think this is kind of the natural progression of the plan. Vin at a certain point seems kind of upset that they're sort of changing the way that they're talking to her about it. Like, they'd always been very much on the side of, why the fuck are you talking to him? That's getting too close to the heat. Back off a little bit. And she seems frustrated with the fact that that's flip-flopped a little bit now, but things have changed in the plan too. Like, this is a necessity, and being able to lean into Elend is their best bet. So it's absolutely something to exploit from Vin, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a big component between the group of them. So, yeah. As they're kind of discussing these other details about sort of the way that the plan is going to proceed with Vin kind of in her place, recruitment in the garrison, all of these details kind of start to work themselves together. Again, like another planning session, I think we've had probably 3 of these as we've gone through the story with a couple of catch-ups. This is, again, reworking the plan to adjust to the new information. Says it arrives with a note from Marsh that they are intended to meet up as he has news. Afterward, Kelsier and Vin discuss the 11th medal and how Kelsier has observed the Lord Ruler. He obviously can't be omniscient, as we've kind of discussed previously. Otherwise, they'd be dead, that he'd be fully aware of everything that was going on. He also isn't omnipotent, as we know that he is at least restricted in some context to the bounds of allomancy, you know, just as all allomancers seem to be. But there's obviously something else going on. Like, he does have something else.
Yeah. Like we talked about a little bit before, this seems to be kind of the explanation for why the Steel Inquisitors would have been able to be there. It's like he's omniscient, omnipotent, omnipotent, however.
Omnipotent. Yeah, that's how it's said. It's fun.
Yeah, well, it's written.
Be dumb.
Man.
Right. Words suck. I know.
Words suck.
She left me roses by the stairs. There's your segue. Anyway, good luck.
It seems like that's true in an immediate vicinity of him, or at least that's the assumption I'm going on right now. That is my current working theory, is that he knows what's going on in a radius.
In a radius, okay, yeah. Like a range of omnipotence. Yeah. Omnipotence.
Which, I don't know, kind of contradicts the omni part of the term, but, you know, it's limited. But yeah, we kind of touched on this. That's where my thoughts are at.
Cool. All right. Yeah, and we talked about a lot of this a little bit earlier, so no worries. We get also a few more notes on Feruchemi here that we talked a little bit about as well, but we can have kind of the fuller discussion, I think, here. How it's internal in some things. It can affect clarity of thought, speed, and even physical aging and weight, and that they can't be, like, the bands themselves cannot be stolen from another Feruchemist and used. Do you have any other thoughts on Feruchemi?
So I'm really curious why they can't be shared between Feruchemists. It's dependent on the amount of metal, and it must be focused, like the sort of ability must be focused into it. But it's also somehow internal and like specific. Like I'm sure there's a very specific definition, like everything else so far in this story. Like, it is internally consistent. I am positive. But
it's almost like the bands or metals have like Face ID.
Sure.
Like, they require identity. You know what I mean? Like, they've got an identity requirement. Yeah.
Yeah. But how cool would it be to, like, have an entire team focusing strength and giving it all to one person? Like, how fucking awesome would that be?
That would be wild. That is an implication that I hadn't really considered. Because I always thought about it within the rules. So, like, I've always thought about it with the Feruchemi rules. But you're right. Like, if you could take these and somehow remove the restrictions, you could actually create a god. Like,
yeah.
If you, in theory, had enough people that were forced to channel in a certain way, and you could hand that off somehow,
Or even if they weren't forced, if you had like a champion.
Right. Yeah, right. You could use it in other ways too to like not be. I was just imagining the Lord Ruler's enslavement and like furthering that a little bit.
I mean, there's that.
Like he hasn't figured that out. So, like there's no.
But I'm curious what that restriction is and how it actually works.
Sure.
Because it doesn't seem explicitly obvious to me why that restriction would exist. But
yeah,
I mean, it does.
But it is.
It is what it is, and I'm excited to learn more about it.
I feel like the reason that they give is that identity, right? Because it's you storing power, so you're the only one who can access it because it's your power.
Yeah, but you're storing it into something external.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Like
all that I'm saying is like that's their assumption, which is our assumption at the same time.
Right. No, I totally get it, and I'm not saying like that doesn't make sense.
No, I know you. But I'm just saying that like
I want the delineation. I want the understanding. I want the details. I want the nitty gritty. Yeah. Give me the nitty gritty.
Give me it. Yeah. I really think that the like even physical aging and like health component of feruchemy is interesting.
That's how old is the Lord Ruler?
1,000 years.
Like, I don't know, man.
Yeah.
What's going on here?
Yeah, it's interesting. So Kelsier also mentions that he thinks that it's odd. We kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, but Kelsier says that it's odd that allomancy isn't mentioned in the logbook, right? And he had expected information on the 11th metal to come out of this. We know there's a little bit left that says it still has to translate. He assumes that it's because whatever happened in the mountain snapped him and changed the Lord Ruler from hero to tyrant. Like whatever happened in the mountains that must happen in this critical next section of the logbook really changed him. What do you think of Kelsier's take here? What do you think is going on in terms of the sort of allomantic considerations? What are your thoughts?
So I think I touched on this a little bit earlier, but this makes me realize that Kelsier assumes that allomancy existed before the Ascension. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why he has that assumption, if it's just because he doesn't know any, like he hasn't seen any evidence to suggest otherwise, or if he knows
likely
that
true.
It did exist. Yeah. It's one or the other. He knows it existed, or he hasn't seen anything opposing it. But the one question for me is how the Mistborn misting monikers came about, because the story isn't the story that these powers were bestowed upon the nobility from the Lord Ruler as a reward for being loyal.
Yes. Yeah, that is the story as it stands.
Right. And Kelsier knows that story. So
I think that means that he's assuming that it's a lie, given that context.
And I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I'm curious what he actually knows here about this, and if there's information that we haven't been privy to regarding it. But it'd be pretty cool.
Yeah.
We know feruchemy exists.
Feruchemy.
Yeah. We know that exists beforehand based on descriptions from the logbook. But allomancy, like he mentioned, hasn't been described. So, are they derivative of each other? Are they entirely separate? What's up?
How's that defined? Right. There's a lot of interesting questions posed here between the logbook, the understanding of the logbook, and then like the history that the Ska have limited access to, which only becomes more interesting when we're given like Elend's perspective later, and we get, someone who knows a lot more again all of a sudden, which is interesting. We'll get there when we get there, but we also learned about the 9th metal here, of which has not been talked about. We've talked a lot about the 11th metal. We've surmised a lot of things about the 11th metal. We talked about how Kelsier also has mentioned that it is so dangerous to just be consuming metals. It can kill you. It can be way worse than a pewter dragon hangover, burning a bad metal. We get a lot of information on that, which is also why Kelsier is terrified to like just try the 11th metal. Because what if it's not correct? What if it's not really what it should be? But we learn about the 9th metal. We learn about gold finally, because we've recognized that we've been missing one this whole time, with atium being the 10th. And we also learned that it doesn't follow the rules of the same 8 basic allomantic metals, that everything else is kind of paired off in very clean alloy metal pairs. But atium and gold are not paired in the same way. Gold is, however, a sort of opposite pair in the same kind of way, because atium projects the future and gold projects the future of someone else, and atium projects the past of yourself. So there's an interesting kind of thing here. What do you make of gold in kind of the conversation here around it?
I've been trying to figure out how, like, I made that sort of bold off the cuff claim that Vin and the Lord Ruler could be all somethings of each other based on gold. No idea how that would actually work. Not a clue. I don't know. Whatever. But I'm still trying to figure out how gold could be utilized in a more like tangible way, because Kelsier is basically writing it off as this strange, like, ultimately useless metal. But there's got to be more to it than that. There's got to be. And like maybe there's the possibility of actual communication with the past self, and maybe there's something to do with almost a corporeal form. Like Vin was kind of suggesting that it felt like she could touch the other Vin. Like it felt like it could have been something physical. So even though nobody else could see it, maybe there's some physicality to it somehow. I don't know. Those are just kind of the surface threads that I've been toying
kind of picking
with.
at.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I had never thought about it that way, as the ability to kind of like pick at the past and like change. Because if you've got the ability to see, kind of react to the future, right? Mm-hmm. So, and it changes your mind to be able to kind of perceive that thing. That's a part of atium. So then gold, in turn, could do something like that for the past. At the very least, it allows you to perceive the past, which is a mind-altering effect. But could you affect it in some way?
Or even if not affect it, gain information from it.
Yeah, right.
I don't know.
Interesting.
So I get effectively it's affecting you at your behest?
Yes, yeah, and the way that you're kind of thinking about it, yeah. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I think that makes sense. We move on from the conversation of the ninth battle, because they're having this while they're kind of waiting around for Marsh to show up, to Marsh being here, freshly kind of tattooed with new obligator tattoos as a part of the Canton of Inquisition, which is the specific part of the Steel Ministry that he is now a part of. And you can tell that once again, Marsh and Kelsier are fond of each other inside of this exchange. They kind of have a brotherly conversation for the first time in a long time, it feels. And it feels like we're starting to see these genuine emotions kind of return. And I think that that's really great, considering whatever happened before feels like it's kind of in the rear view, and they're able to kind of move forward as best that they can. We also get a lot of information from Marsh here regarding Luthadel and the Ministry. Did you have any takeaways you wanted to discuss between kind of the soothing that we find out that's going on in mass throughout the city of Luthadel, Marsh's new position, or sort of the interworking of the Ministry that we find out here?
So I think first and foremost, interpersonally between Marsh and Kelsier, Marsh seems to actually kind of respect what Kelsier is doing now, and doesn't see him as kind of a selfish con man like he kind of saw him before. That seems to be pushed aside, or at least he's seeing the true intentions, which is great, awesome. As far as the Ministry goes, they're a bunch of fucks, man. I thought they'd be more more knowledgeable than that. Like, it seems like Marsh's careful sort of self-education and preparation for what he assumed everybody would know to become like a middle of the pack member of the Obligators put him like way farther ahead than any of his peers, because they're like not actually understanding what the fuck's going on. So that was, I mean, it made everybody feel more human in retrospect.
That's a great point.
I definitely saw them as
godly, kind of like not gods, but like they've got this like sort of aura of intimidation, more infallible.
You know, like they're living, they're acting as notaries, but they're somehow more ingrained into society than that. Like the Obligators are
like priest notaries, like priest lawyers.
Yeah,
yeah,
but somehow beyond humanity in my mind up until this point. Now they're just fucks.
Mm-hmm.
Like that was God, I'm gonna feel like such a dick saying this, but that was going back to like the fact that we both were raised Catholic. I went to a Catholic college for my first degree, and there was a seminary on campus, and some of the fucking people that were in that seminary, man, like priests are not necessarily well-adjusted members of society. Like some of them awesome, some of them great people that were going through the seminary program, but some of them were just fucking weirdos.
It takes all kinds, right?
It is what it is. Like,
yeah, right.
Yeah. No judgments, but definitely shifted my perspective of what it meant to be a leader of a church based on like me knowing people going into the profession of becoming a leader of a church, like disillusioned a little bit.
Yeah. I feel that. Definitely understand that. So with that kind of final remark that we get from Marsh, we split and we head into chapter 28. The logbook entry in this chapter is really interesting. So I've got it at the top here. Sometimes my companions claim that I worry and question too much. However, while I may wonder about my stature as the hero, there is one thing that I have never questioned: the ultimate good of our quest. The deepness must be destroyed. I have seen it, and I have felt it. This name we give it is too weak a word, I think. Yes, it is deep and unfathomable, but it is also terrible. Many do not realize that it is sapient, but I have sensed its mind such that it is, the few times I have confronted it directly. It is a thing of destruction, madness, and corruption. It would destroy this world not out of spite or out of animosity, but simply because that is what it does. Also, that is, in my opinion, some of the best prose that Brandon Sanderson has put into this book. Like, it has a lyrical flow to it that feels very particular. It feels like it's in a Lord Ruler's voice. But the content and context here is really interesting. It gives almost this Lovecraftian sense of like horror and fear to what the deepness is, because it is all at once unfathomable, but also sapient. Like, that is an interesting juxtaposition. What do you get from that in regards to the deepness?
So up until now, I'd never heard the like that use of the term sapient. Like,
sure,
or not use. How would you describe it? Like that word specifically, sapient. Like, I know sapien, but describing something
often,
as sapient was not in my lexicon.
Yeah, generally people say sentient, right? Like it's a sentient thing, but sapient adds it this extra layer, right?
Yeah, and I actually looked up sentient versus sapient explicitly, and it seems like the delineation is self-awareness. So something that is sentient is intelligent, but sapient is intelligent and self-aware of it. So that's the difference, which is a really cool word. I like it. But as I mentioned before in this episode, the biggest thing that I took from this is the fact that he's confronted his mind, or confronted its mind. And that opens us up to a whole host of new potential abilities from the Lord Ruler. And I don't even know what to make of it, man. Like, there's a whole lot of different paths this could go down. And what that actually means, I have no idea.
Yeah, it's an interesting quandary, right? And I think that the otherworldliness that the Lord Ruler really paints here about the deepness is critical to the understanding of it, and in turn makes it really otherworldly. Like, we've thought about it as this thing. It's also already defeated in our current age. Like, we know that the deepness is defeated or gone as it stands, or whatever it was. Clearly, the Lord Ruler won out, but it does leave this other sort of otherworldly question of like, what even the fuck was it? And especially using the word sapient with something that's unknowable it feels very Lovecraftian. It feels very horror story. Yeah. Ooh, it's good. It's good. It's a clever way of like looping us into what was going on in the past.
Right. For sure.
So we exchange this very otherworldly experience with an otherworldly thing that Vin has gotten used to. It was outside of her comfort zone, and now she is back at the balls, baby. She has an interaction with Lady Kliss, and it's just kind of fun for Vin. It almost feels like she's toying with her in a way, and like she knows the game that she's playing. She understands, even though Kliss is like gossiping and whatnot, she's a bit of a dolt, and that makes this kind of enjoyable exchange because Vin has enough self-confidence and self-awareness now to be like, lady, shut up, stop talking about that. That's not important. I have shit to tell you. It's more important that I need you to start bouncing around. And she knows that there's clearly from the way that Lady Kliss is interacting, she's going to openly share the information that she's told to forget about House Hastings, and because she's a total gossip. It's just a very interesting kind of spin on the whole thing. It's a fun moment.
Yeah. This was weirdly satisfying to read for me.
That's a good way of putting it.
I think it's because this reminds me of the interactions between like my mom and grandma, where every single conversation is don't tell anybody, but like it is just gossip over gossip over gossip of things that don't actually require gossip. Like you don't have to say don't tell anybody about this thing. Like nobody fucking cares. Nobody's trying to keep it a secret, but like it is just inherently gossip and inherently don't share this, but we all know you're going to share it with all of my siblings or all of your friends. Like it's just how it goes. So like knowing that and like coming from it from that perspective, or coming at it from that perspective of my interaction between my mom and grandma and like aunts and uncles and like my mom's side of the family entirely speaks like this. Like very, very intentionally saying, don't share this with anybody. I don't know. It was, for whatever reason,
kick out of it.
It spoke to me. So
nice. That's great. It's great when writing does that and brings up and evokes those feelings in our own life. And I really, really enjoy that as a perspective on this one. It's wild. It's fun. It's like egregious in a strange way. And we've been building up to this point of like Vin having this confidence inside of these rooms. And it's just kind of fun to witness it. Right. And like, she knows exactly how to play all these people now. Like she's come into her own as Valette as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I really enjoy the banter that we get a little bit later here between our literate scamp and Valette Elend, and you know, kind of the way that they chat. It's great, and she begins to feel this warmth. You know, she's got this, I think, what everyone else would describe as affection, and it's a really kind of. Yeah, what is this strange feeling of appreciating someone else? And yeah, it's just really touching, I think, in a big way. And even him going, I think I'm going to kiss you, has this like really sweet note to it. It's aggressive, of course, and like there's that whole other context. But he's also asking and like respects that boundary, which is important. But it's got this sweet note to it, considering their path to this point. What do you think about their blossoming relationship?
Yeah, this is the point where seeing sort of the innocence and bashfulness of these interactions to a certain extent maybe really start to believe that Elend was actually being above board with Vin the entire time. Mm-hmm. I'm still not sure why he was so open with her from the start, but you know, that's something for me to wrestle with, and maybe that's more a reflection of my own trust issues. But
we've talked a lot about your trust issues on the show over the course of Mistborn and Red Rising. It's funny.
But we get all but confirmation by the end of this section that like there's nothing nefarious going on between Elend and Vin. I don't think we explicitly get confirmation on that, but we get essentially we get an understanding from Elend's perspective of what's going on, and it doesn't seem like he's trying to play her in any way. So, you know, that's good.
That's a plus. Yeah. We can maybe trust a nobleman, right? Like maybe.
We'll see.
We'll see. It's definitely, it's something for sure. Something of quality. And of course, Elend giving into this idea of trust and like not fucking around reveals a pretty huge detail that appears to be even kept secret from other house members, other house lords. It feels like this is a deep, dark secret of where they get their money. And we find out that the House Venture is responsible for mining and delivering atium to the Lord Ruler. They are the managers of the Pits of Hatsin.
That is a spicy meatball.
On top of a shit-ass carbonara, yeah.
Who puts meatballs on carbonara?
No one. That's smart. Yeah.
Oh, boy. It's like, that's a tangle that we'll have to deal with later, potentially.
Yeah, how do you feel? What do you think about that? If you had to untangle that, make a prediction about how that's going to swing.
Well, it's going to make it a lot more difficult for Vin to bring Elend into the fold with Kelsier. Like, it's just a few more landmines to navigate. I don't know. But also, it could be a boon if we get Elend on, like, flipped, essentially, and working for the crew, or with the crew. Then we have potentially a direct tie to both the Lord Ruler and to the atium production. Like, it can be exploited in a very, very positive way for our crew here. It's just precarious.
Fair point. Yeah, like there's a point of this kind of could go either way. There's a seesaw going back and forth of like the potential here, and at the bottom of each side of the seesaw there is a landmine of how this could go off, right? Like, either way, if someone's ass touches the ground, everyone is fucked.
Yeah.
And Vin is the hinge, like, this all makes total sense to me now.
Yeah.
The seesaw metaphor is perfect. Yeah, it's a tough point. It's a tough point right now to live in. We also have a conversation about how foolish Elend is for wearing metal versus wood, and how the Lord Ruler wears medals and rings so as to encourage the nobility to do it as well, as though it's some piece of art or a part of his plan. We've talked about this before, but it's reiterated again through kind of Elend. It kind of has this feeling of foreshadowing, maybe? It's not even, like, it's odd. It's a detail, right? What are you thinking? What do you feel? I'm making this a prediction.
It's made a point often enough to make it too difficult to ignore. Like, there's clearly something very important about this. And I think it's absolutely a part of some sort of overarching plan from the Lord Ruler. Maybe it just allows for some oversight. Like, maybe he's able to sense metals in a very specific degree when they're nearby. So he's able to know, like, people's whereabouts and, like, what they're up to. I don't know. Clearly flagged as a prediction. I'm not entirely convinced of what I'm saying, but that's what I'm going with. That it's some sort of physical way to track people, see what they're doing, what they're up to, but also in a certain way know that they can be not necessarily trusted, but that they're kind of doing what they can to appease him, I guess. Like, if they're very obviously and cavalierly wearing metal, it probably means that they're loyal to him.
Yeah, it's a sign of fealty for sure, I think. Like, I would agree with you there, because they're following kind of in the footsteps. It's what he's instructed, so it feels like something handed down from God himself, in their context and their religion. So it is an interesting kind of stopping point to, like, talk and discuss a little bit, but it seems to be an interesting enough point because there are some who wear the metal themselves, and there are others who we know fake it with wood, and it's all about kind of appearances to some degree. So there's a question there. We also know that for those people that can push or pull, they can see when things are metal or not. So, like, they would be able to interpret if someone's wearing fake metal, and therein, like, that's an interesting confounding factor, I should say, to this whole thing. Is, like, for those who understand how allomancy works or have access to one of those two metals, like, that's a thing.
We know for sure that the Lord Ruler is capable of soothing. I guess we don't know for sure. We assume that intense soothing comes from the Lord Ruler. So, under that assumption, the Lord Ruler is capable of soothing. Are there any other allomantic powers that have been demonstrated from the Lord Ruler directly? Or has it only been soothing so far?
I think the assumption is soothing only, but remember that it's hard to discern between rioting and soothing, so there's that. But I think for the most part, we can assume it's probably soothing.
So are we not assuming that the Lord Ruler is a Mistborn?
So you have made comments in the past that you believe that he's a Mistborn because he's also using ATM, right? So
yes, I do believe that, but that hasn't been contextually confirmed in any.
No, right. Yeah. No, I think contextually the only thing that we're fully aware of is
right.
So are you also maybe assuming that he isn't a Mistborn?
I have no idea what I'm assuming yet. I think it's entirely different. I think it's entirely outside of the commonly understood realm of Mistborn versus Misting, based on just the oddities of direct, like, mind connection to the deepness for whatever reason in that passage, and the scale at which these powers are being demonstrated. I don't know.
Yeah, the scale at which everything else is done feels almost, like, not completely, but like almost out of sync in its own way.
Yeah. I'm still of the opinion that he's using ATM.
So if he's both soothing and using ATM, he's a Mistborn.
That would be the assumption. But
yes,
contextually, all we know is soothing.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's why this book is fun, right?
It is fun.
There's so many questions. There's so many, like, just contextual, like, bits, mysteries. So what'd you make of Elend's position and conversation he has with Vin about the Lord Ruler after we kind of get this reveal on sort of what's going on in the background? Vin points to the fact that Elend isn't really a revolutionary based on his explanation of his sort of stances and the conversation that he has with friends. Again, this is outpouring of honesty from Elend, and we even kind of get that verified a little bit later here. But he does wish that he could change the existing system underneath the living God that is the Lord Ruler. What do you think? What do you make?
I thought of this as a possible point of entry for Vin, giving Elend the opportunity to become more than his idle musings, and become more than this philosopher that he kind of fancies himself at this point, and actually take action. We'll see if that becomes a possibility, and we'll see if that gets shut down entirely based on the revelations that he and his friends have later about Vin.
Without directly talking about previous series that we've read, this is an interesting comparison to a specific character of whom is a philosophical actor, but not one of action, against one of action, right? And so we're seeing a very similar juxtaposition of characters being kind of foisted upon us here. And that's interesting from like a writing standpoint of people like writing similar characters and themes and juxtapositions, but it's well executed. And
one of our boys.
I think two of our boys, one ex-boy. Yeah. Oh,
I
wanted
wanted to explicitly make it, but I know.
Yeah, our goal here is we don't want to ruin the other series. Go fucking read Red Rising, you fools. But contextually, yes, there are definitely philosophical parallels there of, dude, you're spending a lot of time thinking and discussing in like smoke rooms with your friends. Go fucking do something about it. And I also get the unending intimidation that is the idea that God is manifest on earth. So you can't do anything about it because God will be like, fuck you, dude.
But at the same time, I feel like this allows for simultaneously getting Elend on Vin's side and explaining away the sort of suspicion about Vin being a spy for another house. It's not necessarily something she wants to reveal right now, but if cornered, that's a way better explanation than what's his name? Josties.
Yeah. Right.
Is insinuating.
Okay, what's the first part of your insinuation there, though? Like that she'll be able to explain is like prompting him to revolution, like prompting him to be a man of action. Okay, just making sure I'm assuming the right thing.
Yeah. Using this as sort of the path for which Elend would join the resistance.
Sure. Okay, that makes sense. We cut, of course, from there. He's going off to go hang out with his friends in the smoke room as he's doing, and as he would, basically says that, like, I have to go do this. I agreed to this already. I've spent a lot of time with you. I want to go hang out with my friends, go drink, whatever. So he leaves, heads off. We take a drink for him. Cheers. Thanks, Elend, for providing us with drink and also for being drunk later and hungover, which is hilarious as he's talking and confronting his dad. Love that for our boy. Vin then circles back, though, and goes and walks up to Shan and is basically trying to get a read on what's going on with Sean Alariel. And Sean Alariel, her dismissal of Vin on her approach seems so strange. Shan Alariel, like Alariel feels like it is so well written. It's Elvish. Like it sounds good when you say it out loud, but it also kind of sounds like you're just like bumble fucking a bunch of vowels in a row with a couple of weird loosey goosey consonants. Mm-hmm. Like it has a very foreign feel on the tongue. It feels very Elvish. Alariel, but yeah,
Alariel. Iona Bologna.
Yeah,
is the parallel that I'm making in my head
forever. But Vin's approach to Shan feels very strange. What do you think she's plotting? What do you think Shan's plotting here?
It is strange, man.
It's a prediction.
I know.
No, for everyone else. It was for the audience.
This is a prediction. So
I
would have guessed that she is playing them both to a certain degree, but if that were the case, she would have, I feel like, tried to keep Vin close to the vest. Like, keep her in the dark, keep her, like, working for her. Like, I don't know. As it stands, I assume she's going to be making a move towards taking Elend down politically, physically, whatever. Probably politically. And letting Vin be close to her would risk letting Elend learn her plans. So that's my assumption why she's pushing Vin away in this way, to make sure Elend doesn't know her intentions.
Yeah, for sure. It is mysterious. Her choice here is very mysterious.
It's odd
on her part. Yeah.
It's stark.
Especially given how, like, forceful she was before, how, like, shoving she was on the part of Vin to try to get that information about the books that he was reading and everything else. And now she's just settled that she doesn't need any information. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's weird. I don't know.
Having a plot like this come up is interesting, too, because we only have so many pages left in the book, right? Like, we've only got 140, I think. I was just, like, looking and trying to do a little bit of math on, but we've only got, like, 150 plus a couple, 160 pages left. So not a ton of book to, like, unravel. Like, there's a decent amount to, like, unravel some of this stuff, but how long can her plot go on?
I also, like, yes, that's a thing, and that's on my mind every once in a while, but at the same time, I know that this is not only a trilogy, it's also a small chunk of a larger, like, series of loosely connected, like, so I am not under the impression that any of these threads are actually going to get resolved by the end of this book. I'm sure some will.
That is such an interesting setting of expectations. It makes sense. I don't like, you know, my brain said behoove, but that's not the word. I'm sympathetic. I'm empathetic at this point. Keep in mind that I haven't read like half of the Cosmere at this point by page count. So like, I don't fucking know some of the shit, but I'm getting there. I have to get there before we get through the well. Well, my goal is to get there before we get through the Well of Ascension, but yeah, I feel you where it does feel like some of these things could live on further. Well of Ascension is the second book. But,
yeah, that's what I was looking at.
Yeah.
Like, is that second or third? I don't know.
Second. Hero of Ages is third.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
The Homeowners Association, as it shows up in the
HOA, baby. Yeah. You're right. That's such an interesting perspective. It's very different than the one that we had inside of other series and even other books, right? Where they're, you know, either we talk about the Blake Crouch things that we did first. Those are self-contained stories. We talk about Red Rising. It's all linear. And there's only so many things, but this is like, well, because you're aware that there's a whole fucking universe, like,
yeah, and
some of these things.
Yeah, and I'm aware that there are multiple series within this universe that aren't necessarily like all linear. Like, that's what I know about this universe, is that like there are multiple series, and they are in the same universe, but I have no idea when they chronologically happen or if they're that directly connected at all. So, like,
cheers to that. I have one spoiler that's the only like real spoiler that I know, which is related to Sphandrius for people who are listening, but that's it. Vaguely. Yep.
What are you drinking?
We just
now?
Drank for that.
We both just drank.
I poured a little bit,
drinking
just a little bit of that whiskey.
Yeah, I did too. Hey and Sunshine.
This is so fucking good. If you can get it there,
Yeah,
I'll send you the brands.
Yeah, send me the brand because I will absolutely take a look.
It is so fucking good. Definitely one of my favorite whiskeys, especially for the price. Oh my God, it's so good. Anyway.
What kind of whiskey do you think
back.
Ellen would drink?
Ellen drinks brandy.
That's not what I asked, Crossland.
I think Ellen would drink Pappy's, but he like wouldn't care that he was drinking Pappy's. You know what I mean?
What a dick.
Right. But like he'd be unaware that like it was this crazy exclusive thing because he's part of the house venture, right? Like it's probably just sitting around on shelves, you know? He just grabs a bottle. So I don't think it's, again, we kind of talked about like the difference in education and like the social previously in the previous episode when we got into our massive conversation, but like if we take that and we extend it to alcohol, his understanding is probably a limited window of the top 1% of tiers because his family is in charge of the ATM mine and one of the biggest houses, the biggest house. So
fuck you, Dad. My favorite whiskey's Bullet Bourbon.
Evan Williams. My favorite whiskey is Evan Williams Honey or Green Apple. You know, one of those. Like,
I like Canadian Club.
Yeah. By the way, enjoy what you enjoy.
Oh yeah, no, like
if you like, we're not genuine. Like I upon occasion, honey whiskey, great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, right.
I am all for finding what's good without like finding the best without paying for label, you know?
Right. That's what we're trying to avoid actively.
There's one. It's one thing if
like Reiki Grey Goose, right?
Yeah, Reiki is by far the best vodka I've ever tasted.
Yeah,
and it's
Tito's is the closest thing that I've had outside of that. Like Tito's
is,
but it's
close.
another $14 a bottle. Like
yeah, but it's also higher volume, isn't it?
No, or which 0.75. Like Tito's is not cheap.
What is Tito's?
Tito's
for a 750.
So like here it's 23 for a Reiki, 22 for a Reiki. I am actually comparing the higher costs. Okay, it's probably like $6 or $7 higher.
Okay.
Yeah, relative.
Interesting.
I was actually
Reiki
exactly what you're saying. I was comparing the volume difference and difference in price volume, but I was using the smaller bottle to the higher bottle, which was wrong.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's like probably $7 more or so.
Okay, I like Reiki a lot more personally.
Right, I would agree.
Yeah, drink Reiki. It's delicious. Anyway.
Yes, without a doubt. Yeah, on average, Tito would cost $29 versus Reiki is $22 here.
Yeah.
So there's your price.
Cool.
Anyway,
Reiki, we are accepting sponsors.
Yeah, please, Reiki, sponsor us. We talk about you so fucking much on the show. Somebody send this to Reiki. They're funny Icelandic dudes. I'm sure they'll love it.
I'm sure we're also pronouncing it wrong.
100%. There's no way.
Rika? Is it Rika? It's Reyka.
They have it on the website. This is a total tangent. They've got also, if you haven't seen, like in certain states, they do sell their bottle with like a fun frozen shot glass, which is really cool.
They don't, or at least I haven't.
They don't
seen
sell
it
in Minnesota. I haven't seen it in North Carolina either, but it is apparently in a lot of other places because I did Google search to like look it up. But yeah, they've got like an icy shot glass, so you're able to use the mold to freeze an ice shot glass, pour the Reiki into it, and like sip it and like bite the shot glass, which is a fun thing that people do to freak their friends out. There's a couple of videos online of that. I'm like, that's fucking genius. Like, you're so feral that you bite through the shot glass. I'm like, that's fucking great. Bad for your teeth, but great. Anyway, cutting back to it. We also switched to a brand new point of view, something that hasn't been introduced in a long fucking time inside of this book. We cut to a point of view from Elend himself. Brandon, with this point of view change, is showing us something that we haven't really seen since the beginning of the story when we were inside of Trusting's perspective. He's providing us with more insight into the noblemen themselves. What do you make of this choice and what we see from Elend in his discussion with Tyndall and Jastes?
I think his friends are making really good points. And I would expect, like, I'd be suspicious of the entire story if these points didn't get brought up, you know? Sure. But they accidentally stumbled into the right conclusion for the wrong reasons, you know? Like, I don't know how you got
that's
here.
A great way of putting
you got to the wrong answer. You got to the right answer. Because she had no idea that was his, like, it wasn't like she was actively not trying to make waves and just happened to, like, I don't know. Yeah.
Just happened to sway. Like, it was, yeah.
Yeah. And she had no idea who he was until after the fact. So it's just funny. It's ironic how this whole thing turned out, because
in a non-Alanis Morissette way, yes, it is genuinely ironic.
Yeah. I don't know what else to say about it, because they are right, but their entire reasoning is completely off base.
Yes, right. Which is, it's kind of a fun little bit. I love how internal Elend is as well, and like very aware. Inside these moments, he's also contemplating things like we talked about his philosopher attitude, right? Like, he has this air about him of like wanting to be a man of action, but then at the same time, he's also like, but the other philosophers were like executed for various reasons over time and for, you know, treason and stuff like that. So he's like, he's in a tough spot. Like, he knows that he's in a tough spot for like what he wants to do and what he thinks that he could do as a hopeful upstart. Makes it tough. It's a tough spot for him and his friends. So a drunken Elend leaves and heads home to House Venture and walks into the house and is immediately detected by his tin eye father, Straff Venture. You can imagine him like trying to sneak past the door, Scooby-Doo style, and then gets like, Elend, come here! In like a gruff. So Michael Kramer's voice here, by the way, is fantastic for Straff. I love Straff's voice from Kramer. But
yeah. That could work. I imagine this kind of like sometimes late at night after we're done recording. Maybe I've had a little bit too much to drink. I don't know. Who knows? Who's to say, really?
But me.
But
what's too much?
Me trying to get ready for bed and like brush my teeth, like take my multivitamin. All of my like nightly routine. I'm trying to do that quietly, and then immediately getting called out. Like, what the fuck is all that noise? Like, oh, I thought it was quiet. That's
only exasperated by a tin eye. Imagine that just elevated. Like, dude, you were not being secret whatsoever.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. Yeah. So
it's also so clear. Yeah. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, that's exactly what was going through my mind, was like, I get it.
Yeah, entirely. How do you imagine this room that he's in?
I have a very specific... I have no reason for it, but I imagine it like... God, what is... Have you watched Handmaid's Tale?
Not yet.
Okay.
Holding off until it's done. That was my...
That's fair.
I've read the book. Like, I know what it's about, but...
Just the visual depiction of the commander's office.
Sure.
Is kind of what I imagine. Just sitting area, fireplace, elegant tables with chessboards set up, shit like that. Yeah. And I'm not taking any of that contextually. I'm sure there were descriptions that I glossed over and did not play into my like imagination of.
I just Googled it, and I definitely imagine it very similarly, but without the blue, and instead a lot more mahogany everywhere, like just dark wood. But I would agree, like in concept, it's so interesting because it's not that well defined, if that makes sense. Like, Brandon doesn't go out of his way to give you much more than a couple of sparse details about a room, to give you just enough to like paint. Like, there are books on the shelves, there's a fire, there's a servant in the way of the fire, he's sitting in a chair. Like, that's what you get. But that's enough to like give you an idea to fill out the rest of the room. It's the same thing with like his depictions of violence a lot of the times. It's like, it's just violent enough to understand and imagine everything else. And that's fun, because then you get to this point where you're like, oh, I can draw this comparison that I have with, you know, The Handmaid's Tale and The Room. I got a very similar vibe, you know, like I said, mahogany shelves, bookcase, you've got the fireplace, you've got him with his feet kicked up on an ottoman, I imagine.
Like...
smoking, sipping something, probably.
Not like a person, like a piece of furniture, right?
the furniture, not a person. There aren't ottomans. Ottoman the people in this story. That's how this works. So part of this conversation, though, is also that servant that's in front of him, which is Tensoon, the House Venture Khandra, of whom's body is that of a servant from the Hastings household. This is one of those nobleman moments where it's like, this is new information that we don't we haven't really parsed yet.
Yeah, it's pretty fucked. The description was most recent body, and that's kind of disturbing. A little bit.
Okay.
At the very least, it gives us more background on what could be going on with Lord Renew, but doesn't provide any actual additional explanation, you know? Like, it's just more context. So, knowing that this sort of thing exists, and what could, like, is this what's happening with Lord Renew, or is it something adjacent? Is it something similar? I don't know, but at least it's not entirely an unknown, undeveloped, unique thing. Thing is right. Not an elegant word, but, you know.
No, I know what you're getting at, though, right. Tensoon, the name is also interesting, too, because it's capitalized in different ways, right? Like 10, one word, combined, capital T, capital S on soon.
Yeah.
Makes for an interesting thing. But we get no other characteristics outside of the fact that they're basically having a conversation, and then when Elend walks in, Tensoon walks out. That he's embodying the persona of a Hastings household member, which is interesting because that is an incredible spy to have that can shift bodies.
Yes. Yes, it is. And that gives me a whole lot of thoughts, man.
Yeah.
A whole lot of thoughts. Like,
do you have thoughts?
Is that Shan? Is Shan one of those? That
Anything
could be.
Else? Any other thoughts?
Quan.
Quan is spelled K-W-A-N, like not spelled differently.
No, I know. I wasn't talking about his spelling. I'm just saying, like, potentially.
Gotcha.
The shift in the sudden stark shift in Quan's behavior that we get in. I mean, it's the next sort of logbook entry. Like, could that explain that stark change in behavior? Something to that effect.
That he's being imitated, changed. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know.
All right. It's fucking fun, right?
It's a lot of fun.
So we move from this really fun idea of Tensoon and Khandra in general into Straff just being a motherfucking dick. Like, the dude is a fucking asshole. And we kind of got that. We got a taste of it in the way that he treated Kelsier. But even to his own son, he says things like, you're never going to inherit the house and shit like that. We know that we're aware at the very least that there's really no other heir. Like, Elend is the heir for all intents and purposes. This fucking sucks. What do you make of the conversation between him and Daddy Dearest here?
I mean, what a dick.
Like, just fuck.
But at the same time, it doesn't seem intentionally that malicious. It seems like he has a very clear motivation, which is the preservation and prosperity of his house. Both.
Yes, definitely true.
So, yes, he's an asshole, and yes, he seems antagonistic towards Elend, but it's because Elend is putting himself in a position where he is opposing that motivation, as opposed to just being unfairly villainized by his father, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a great way of looking at it, too, because he isn't strictly... Like, Elend isn't behaving according to code. Like, if Elend was behaving in a way that Straff felt was appropriate, sure. Like, they would have a better relationship, but at the same time, Elend is like he's not a teenager, he's an adult. I think he's 18. I think we delineated that early.
Oh, I don't remember his age.
What was the age difference between Vin and...
Unless you're a very mature 12-year-old or something like that?
4-year-old? It was younger than
about twice my age.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Unless you're
10-year-old. Yeah. I think Vin turned 18 and he's 20. I think that's what it is.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Right. Very mature 10-year-old. Yes, to your point.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, so like he's actively pushing against, he kind of has like, there is a teen angst and like pushing out against your family, university like era kind of thing going on around him. That makes sense. He's intellectually explorative, which is again against father. You know, it makes sense, but at the same time, Straff is just the absolute worst rendition of the worst type of father in that situation. Like this, There are few examples that I can think of. There's only one that I can think of that's really, really new that like I literally read in this watched in this last week. That is a worse example of a father in my head in the same kind of situation. And boy, that one's bad. Everyone go watch Peacemaker. but fucking wild. Yeah. So, God.
Yeah. But yeah, ultimately, like the crux of that is what a dick.
What a dick, Straff Venture. How dare you?
How
we
dare
end the chapter. How dare you? How dare you be an asshole to our boy, Elend? We end the chapter, of course, with a discussion with Lord Jastes about Vin and her whereabouts, or seemingly her disappearance from her carriage after the ball. Elend orders spies to then go track someone. This is interesting and leaves a lot of kind of questions here circulating, right? Like this, he doesn't put it in words that he wants to track Vin necessarily, but,
right.
You know.
Yeah, so like I don't get the feeling from this entire conversation that he's completely convinced by Jastes' claims, but at the very least, it's making him think.
Right.
Whatever. But like you said, we're kind of made to assume that the spies are to follow Vin, but boy, howdy would I love it to be Jastes.
That they follow Jastes instead? Because you think he's kind of being shady?
No, not that he's being shady, but that like that's Elend's perspective. Like I think Jastes is making very, very intelligent and great insights. Like those are the conclusions
he's
that
really
should be
smart and,
made.
like, reasonable.
Yeah, it's
right.
very reasonable. It's just wrong, kind of.
Right.
But I don't know. I think it'd be funny to have Jastes be followed. But yeah, we're made to assume that this is to follow Vin. Or the other option, I think, and I think would make more sense, knowing to a certain extent how the nobility works, I think he'd probably set the spies to follow Sazed.
Interesting. Okay.
Under the assumption that Sazed would be
Follow
less suspicious.
Yeah.
Of everybody in the vicinity, and therefore easier to follow and easier to keep track of.
That's interesting, and I think a good read. Because, like, in theory, the stewards are relatively bland and boring. That would make a ton of sense. Yeah. All right. So we end this week with a logbook section, of course, as we do most every week. The logbook at the beginning of chapter 29, as the audiobook reads as such. The others all think I should have had Quan executed for his betraying me. To tell the truth, I'd probably kill him this moment if I knew where he'd gone. At the time, however, I just couldn't do it. The man had become like a father to me. To this day, I don't know why he suddenly decided that I wasn't the hero. Why did he turn against me, denouncing me to the entire conclave of the Worldbringers? Would he rather the deepness win? Surely, even if I'm not the right one, as Quan now claims, my presence at the Well of Ascension couldn't possibly be worse than what will happen if the deepness continues to destroy the land.
Yeah. Super interesting. And this isn't entirely new, but it's something that hasn't been shown in a logbook in a while. Since early in this novel, I guess. But the Lord Ruler's uncertainty of himself. And I think it's a significant enough point to make, like, to actually point out, you know? Like, I'm not sure what to make of Quan still, but what is the one of the first entries talking about him being a fraud and like just kind of the identity crisis of who this author is and if it's entirely fraudulent. And that's been absent in these writings for most of the book since then.
Yeah, part 1 and part 2, I feel like had some bits of that, right? Like of him feeling like a fraud and then being confronted by people like Rashek, but then being reminded, like someone like Quan being like reaffirming that, no, you were the hero. And then the prophets believe this, and like you're lining up with a lot of the ideas here. And that sort of, you know, throughout the logbook, Quan has been like instilling in Our Boy the Lord Ruler like a decent amount of faith. Mm-hmm. And our boy the Lord Ruler,
our boy,
here is losing the faith of Quan, has completely lost it. So
yeah, and this is where that sort of thought of maybe it's a body snatcher.
A body snatcher, huh?
Well, not body snatcher.
Oh, for Quan, right.
For
I thought
Quan.
You meant for the Lord Ruler. I was
no,
like, Jesus
no,
Christ.
No. No, but for Quan, because
I about had a heart attack.
No, so I'm not making that egregious of a jump right now.
Okay, that's good. Dear
but
God.
This is a departure from Quan's typical disposition, you know?
Oh yeah, definitely. It's definitely sort of it is the switch, right? And like now, given hindsight, the Lord Ruler would have killed him for sort of the actions that he's gone through, but at the same time, he's internalizing that and having a tough time. It's very interesting because I don't know have I drawn this comparison before? I think I might have. This feels closer to what meditations feels like in the beginning of the book, when it's really a lot about kind of the surrounding battles and things like that before it starts to devolve into, not devolve, but like change into something more, a little bit more philosophical. On the front end, it ends up being a lot more personal and about the people around him and sort of reacting to the situations and thinking about battles and the people who taught him things. This feels like, in a similar way, reacting to some of those same moments. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It does.
Final thoughts on this week?
This was such a fun episode to record, man.
This is a great episode. I love this episode. Fact. We are, you know, it's one of those weird things where it's like you're constantly improving at something, and every once in a while you just finish something and you're like, that felt really good. And this is one of those where it's like, I think that was really good.
We're also coming off the heels of an episode where we spoke for like 8 hours.
That's a fair point.
You were very generous with the edit to make. I think you made a very fair. How would I call it?
I think that is a distillation of
a fair distillation of the conversation. That's the right way to put it, I think. But that conversation went on for fucking ever, and like an extra 2 hours after we stopped recording.
Yeah, like we were like, we both got to a point where it's like, okay, we have to actually finish the rest of this fucking episode. Mm-hmm. So let's just power through the back half of this. And then when we got done, it's like, all right, now it's time to hash out the details of what we were talking about.
And I think the point that we finally came to at the end of it was when I mentioned the term intentionality, which I didn't mention at all during the actual recording. No. But I think that's what actually conveys what I was talking about. Intention.
Right. Intentionality and perspective were kind of our dueling things that like we both needed to make sure that it was clear on.
Yeah.
And that's where I think actually early in the conversation we said those things without being explicit, and then we got really picky about being explicit about things. And so then that's when it became a question of none of this is making it out to anyone else.
Yeah. It was a very fun conversation though.
So. Yes. We are not mortal enemies, so
no, not at all. Thank you for parsing through that and making an intelligible like cut that lasted 15 minutes.
Correct. Yeah, I cut down like a 3-hour conversation into 15 minutes, basically, which was a feat. We'll just call it that. But actually what's fun is that most of that conversation is very linear, except for you accepting things, which I cut in. It's all very, very linear, and like it's all pretty much in line. I didn't move anything really out of place, except for a point at which to cut out of the conversation. So
that's fair.
That's the only thing that was really shifted. Because I was like, this is the point that we came to, so I can make you, like, I can just insert an agreement, because this is what we agreed upon. This is fine.
You ran it by me first, too. So
I did. I double checked. I wasn't pushing any boundaries or being a cheat or a scamp. Yeah. With that, to that point, let's move into our question of the week. The question, of course, because of our fucking lengthy, again, PJ's predictions, you've heard them over the course of the episode. We'll reiterate them at the beginning and when they come up again. But questions of the week. What was your favorite moral debate after we had last week's? It felt like the only fucking question that we could ask. So, PJ, you kick it off here.
From
double checking on Instagram.
How would I pronounce this? I know I would pronounce it Rob
G 54.
But Rob 54 on Instagram. Jean Valjean and Inspector Javert. How would you pronounce it?
I think it's Javert, but I don't. Javert. It might be Javert. I don't French.
Les Miserables? Is that how you pronounce that?
Yeah, from Les Miserables. Yeah.
Dude,
I wrote it so that you could pronounce it. Like, I wrote it so that you could pronounce it correctly.
I'm still going to double check. I'm still going to second guess myself because I'm not good at reading.
Yeah, otherwise it reads as Les Miserables, like if you're reading it regularly. So
Yeah, but strict obedience to the law or room for grace and
growth. But yeah,
growth.
They got cut off with letters. So it's
Gotcha.
Grace or growth.
Grace and growth. Yeah, that seems perfectly in line with this.
Yeah, especially considering it's about, like, Les Miserables is about the French Revolution, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's totally fits. It's a wonderful moral debate. Yeah. Again, from Instagram, from Cosmere writing, utilitarianism is a fascinating one to me in any storytelling. And I agree. I think utilitarianism in general can make for very compelling storytelling. There are a number of different stories that kind of point to those things, or like people's individual philosophies in storytelling. So this is a great, like, moral debate that exists in a number of books. And my favorite example is from Stephen Baxter's Zealey sequence in parts, just in chunks. It's like a 20-book series, so it's hard to say. They cut back and forth from philosophical ideas, but
gotcha.
Yeah.
From Siphondrius the Howler on our Patreon Discord, Dostoevsky, specifically Crime and Punishment, The Morality of Murder.
Have you read Crime and Punishment?
I have not.
I thought that might have been a high school read for you, but I wasn't sure.
No,
in AP it was, so.
Yeah, I wasn't able to take AP English or AP Literature because of orchestra, maybe? No, it wasn't orchestra. It was something else.
It was something
maybe it was
like
a
that,
math
though.
class.
Right.
Maybe it was some like advanced math
I think it was,
class that I had
was
to
it
take.
like calc?
Yeah, it was something like that. But I wanted to. I ended up not being able to take those classes.
There was another class member who I remember had to, like, switch back and forth and, like, deal with a ton of stuff between, I think, math and lit in order to make that work. So, yeah.
It was something. It was something to that effect.
Yeah.
But no, I never read Crime and Punishment.
I think it's a great read, especially now, like, not being forced to read it is wonderful. I think I mentioned this to Savandrius inside of the Discord, but I read it probably once every 2 years-ish at this point. I liked it the first pass that I read it in high school, and then in post, I've given it a lot more. And I really think that it is such a fascinating meditation on morality, humanity, and so many other things, especially for something that was written at the same time as the Civil War. Yeah, that's what's wild about it. Like, this novel was written at the same time as the Civil War, and that gives it this, like, almost otherworldly feeling to all of the characters and the environment and the reality of everything. It's so weird. It's so different and distinct. Dostoevsky rocks. I'm going to cut to one of our members of our Discord who sent me a message in right at the bell here. So Marcus from Discord, the thought of a moral dilemma from one of my favorite book series. It's from Legend by Murray Liu. In it, one of the main characters, June, is a prodigy in their military. She gets tasked with capturing Day, a young rebel who is on top of their most wanted list. Long story short, she has to determine whether to follow her orders or to believe Day and betray all of her years of training. And this is definitely a moral dilemma. I've read Legend. I really enjoyed it. It's a wonderful YA dystopian fantasy series. Mary Lou is a fantastic author, and I highly recommend it. I think that this is a great moral dilemma. I totally agree with you, Marcus.
Awesome. Yeah, that came in basically
right when we started.
A minute before we started recording this.
No, it was wild because we were actually in the middle of our icebreaker, technically.
Yeah.
And then I added it.
Yep.
Yeah.
So thanks for getting in under the radar there. For me, this is my own answer. If you have not yet read Golden Sun, the second book in the Red Rising series by Pierce Brown, this will be a spoiler for that, so skip ahead 30 seconds. Starting now. Darrow's decision to drug Roke in order to save him from the bomb, essentially. Even just isolated, that is a moral quandary of, like, where do you draw the line between him personally? He's directly deciding to save somebody of, like, the class that he's trying to overthrow. But beyond that, the just waterfall of consequences that comes out of that is just, it just goes farther and farther and farther and pervases through basically the rest of the story. Really, really interesting and fun. Fun quandary for Darrow there.
I'm so glad you came around to being on my team on this. But yes, it only in perfect hindsight do you kind of get the full context of how the minutia of that choice impacts the rest of the story. Like, it's such a weird, you don't really get it until the end.
Yeah.
So cool. With that, mine is one of mine from my actual favorite movie. It's one that I think about all the time. It's one I watch this movie probably, honestly, like once every 2 months. Like, I literally love and adore Looper more than I love and adore anything else. But the trouble or the paradox of being presented with a certain future and the ability to change it at a dire cost to oneself is a fascinating moral quandary. Like, it is a choice to sacrifice one for the many, which seems classic, but in the context of the finality of that moment in that movie, it is so quick. There's no time to debate. There's no time to philosophize. This is the moment where you pull the trigger one way or another, and it's the same character pulling the trigger, and that's why it's fascinating. Like, that impetus to make that decision is a moment in writing that I think, I don't know, man, I haven't experienced a whole lot better twists and stories and philosophical moral debates that are depicted in 30 seconds of dialogue and 10 seconds of film ever. Oh, yeah. It's gut-wrenching to me to this day. That's why it's my favorite movie. Like, the rest of the movie is fantastic. It's brilliantly shot. But that final moment makes you question all of the individual decisions, the cascading decisions. And yeah, I got in a Twitter conversation with Ryan Johnson about this particular point. And in addition, the Rainmaker and the characters in general on Twitter, I have it like tagged and saved because it's like a 12 tweet like reply response that we were just having a great time talking about back in like 2014. And I fucking love this story so much, dude. I can't stop. Anyway, that's mine.
There you go.
With that, we have our question for next week. This one's a little bit more complicated, so we want to give a little bit of context. So the scene that we kind of want to reference for our question is that of the Lord Ruler in the cart, in the black carriage, with the white horses, the spectral-ish horses out front. Often in stories, villains can be hidden in the background to create a sense of menace, like Darth Vader in the original Star Wars series, only appearing for the 14 minutes on the film. In total, we get the initial appearance of horror, and then later it's kind of this threat in the background until their sudden reveal in the second or third act, or their reappearance at that point. We pose the question, what's your favorite villain reveal?
We were trying to find the best way to actually like word that question, and I'm glad you came up with that sort of preamble, because I think that explains what we're talking about. So, yeah, I'm excited to see what answers might come out of this.
This is such a good one. There's so many. Like, I've got a couple that I can't talk about explicitly, because we'll talk about them in some other contexts later in other book series. But there are a couple that I can think of that I love and adore. And I just want to make sure that it's implied that, like, the goal here is the reveal of the villain and kind of the menace. There's a couple of recent movie examples that I can think of from the MCU that do a good job with this. There's a couple, there's a ton out there. So, yeah. Cool. With that, we go into next week. Next week, we are going to be reading chapters 29 through 32. Again, 69 pages in the paperback. 2 weeks in a row. Dope. Hey, got him. Yeah. So, again, chapters 29 through 32. So that's where we'll leave you for this week.
Thank you, as always, to Tim and Andrew for making sure this entire thing runs smoothly. Check out all the links in the show notes. You can find our schedule, our Patreon, previous episodes, websites, social media, everything, all in one convenient location.
And keep an eye out. There's new things that might be changing and launching relatively soon. Check the websites. They'll be there first, probably.
What are you talking about, Crossland?
I'm not talking about anything. I don't know what you don't know that I'm talking about.
I know, but I'm posing as if I'm not.
Oh, well, there are going to be fun things. February is going to be a very fun month. Very excited. But with that as well, we still have ongoing right now. This is kind of at the time that this comes out, you've got about a week left to enter into our Instagram giveaway contest. Make sure that you go ahead, tag 2 people, comment, check it out on Instagram, Words and Whiskey Pod, or Words Whiskey Pod, like PJ had said previously. Again, available on Twitter, Instagram, Reddit, Words and Whiskey Show at gmail.com, Words and Whiskey Pod, Twitter, Instagram, Reddit, and patreon.com/Words and Whiskey.
I would like to correct you there. You said Words and Whiskey Pod. It is just Words Whiskey Pod.
I'm going to edit it so it's proper.
There we go.
It's fine.
Good deal.
I can fix this part really easily. And then beyond that, just keep a lookout. We've got some stuff coming up that's going to be really cool. I tweeted about it a little bit, but we booked 2 author interviews.
Yes.
So
got those. We've got new projects that the two of us have been involved with for the last couple of months that are potentially, I don't know when that's going to come like publicly.
Yeah, TOK is a completely different release date at this point.
We're giving it acronyms now, huh?
Oh, well, it's more fun to give it an acronym so that people can try to work out what the fuck that means. Into SP.
Yeah. It'll be a fun time.
So, yeah. Going to be a very fun time. Thank you all so much for your support. Again, leave us a review if you can on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or on your podcatcher of choice. Listen, subscribe, let us know. And we love you.
We'll see you next time.
At the very least, as much as like Elend loves Brandy.
Maybe even
Which
more.
is to say a little bit too much sometimes, but not enough other times.
A healthy amount.
We love you.
Verging on unhealthy.
We love you like a 12 p.m. beer for Vin's sake, you know?
Yeah.
Right.